cool. A Star Trek convention.
Melvar, can you give us some idea of how long this is going to last?
Until time stops.
You can't do this.
Now, we have a full schedule of events.
Can people who hate Star Trek leave?
Good question.
No, you have to stay even longer.
No.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another Trek Talk live stream here on Classic Comics, where I take a look at one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series, both the making of the series and behind the scenes. So this week, going to be taking a look at A Private Little War. And this is it's an interesting episode, certainly. It is reminiscent of some others, particularly Friday's Child, I think, comes to mind, and maybe Omega Glory. I think there's some elements of that in this one as well. And as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for the behind the scenes and making of information. So this episode was written by, well, the screenplay is credited to Gene Roddenberry, but the original author was Don Ingalls, although he had his name removed from it. I'll get into that in the behind-the-scenes stuff. And directed by Mark Daniels. So this is from the NBC press release issued on January 3rd, 1968. An inhabitant of the imperialistic planet Klingon is sent to execute the takeover of peaceful planet Neural, forcing Captain Kirk to wage a private little war on NBC television network Star Trek Colorcast on Friday, February 2nd. Kirk and his officers beam down on Neural for a routine meeting, only to find that the Klingon Krell already has stirred up trouble between the Plains people under the leadership of Tyree and the Hill people under the leadership of Apella. Tyree's wife, Nona, wants her husband to make use of Kirk's superweapons so that she can become a queen. The resulting war brings about a costly peace. The stakes increase with each perilous step Kirk takes. Spock is wounded by a warring tribesman's flintlock rifle. As the first officer fights for his life back on the Enterprise, Kirk falls victim to the poisonous fangs of an ape-like creature known as the Mugato. The only chance of saving the captain's life is to surrender him into the care of a local witch doctor, an alluring and ambitious woman who wishes to use Kirk and his technology to gain power. Kirk's old friend and, for her and her man, Kirk's old friend and blood brother, Tyree. The theme is still debated today. Do superpowers have the right and the wisdom to choose sides and supply arms in civil conflicts? The Vietnam War was raging in Asia, and a division of political and personal philosophies was splitting American public opinion. Network television, especially primetime entertainment shows, stayed carefully neutral. This Star Trek episode is believed to be the first entertainment show to make commentary on American foreign policy as it pertained to Vietnam and the heated debates over that undeclared war. Now, actually, they say that here, but later, when I get to the writing of this episode, there's someone who says something to the contrary on that. And this makes A Private Little War notable and historic. Subtlety, however, was not Gene Roddenberry's style. He has Kirk ask McCoy, "Remember the 20th century brush wars on the Asian continent? Two giant superpowers involved, much like the Klingons and ourselves. Neither felt they could pull out. I remember," McCoy interrupts, "it went on bloody year after bloody year." "What would you have suggested, that one side arms its friends with an overpowering weapon?" Kirk counters. "Mankind would never have lived to travel in space if they had, Bones. We can't take this planet back to where it was. The only solution is what happened then. A balance of power. And if the Klingons give them any even more," McCoy challenges. Kirk says, "We'll give this side exactly that much more. The trickiest, most difficult, dirtiest game of them all. But it's the only one that preserves both sides." Roddenberry wanted to make sure that everyone watching got the point and the reference. Detractors cite A Private Little War as preachy. Supporters call it honest and direct. Just as Vietnam had split America into two distinct camps, this episode created a division of its own. And there is another division. Separating Kirk and Spock was rarely a good idea, and this episode suffers from the lack of connection between the two main characters. In Ingalls' original story outline, a security guard was shot by the Hill people, not Spock. The Vulcan was present when Kirk is attacked by the Mugato, actually called a Gumato in the original script. It was Spock, not McCoy, who kills it, and he uses a spear, not a phaser. But Roddenberry felt the story lacked personal jeopardy. He decided Spock should take the bullet, as well as making Kirk a blood brother with Tyree. There are other questionable plot devices. The action is relentless and character elements are thin. Case in point, we are told that Kirk and Tyree are blood brothers and best of friends, but little of what we see conveys how such a bond was formed. Much of the script goes forward in this way. We are told things and expected to accept them without explanation or substance. This episode's strength lies in the Vietnam parallel. The comparisons were obvious to adult, teens, and even children, and A Private Little War became a topic of conversation for years to come. Yeah, so this is one of the first times the Star Trek is really commenting on current events in this very obvious way. Actually, let me look at the comments here right quick. I see some people are posting. Hi, Classic Comics. Wanted to stop and say hi. Hello, Pop Culture Minefield. Thanks for stopping by. Good to see you. And Snortopoopus Cuber, my favorite bear on YouTube. Hello, humans and other critters. All right. Okay, yeah, so this one, and in addition to being kind of political, I think this one is actually one of the more, certainly up to this point, one of the more, I guess you'd say, adult episodes. It really is kind of pushing the boundaries of what you could do on TV at the time in terms of sexual and violent content, I think. And I'll talk about that as I go through the episode. All right, let's get into this. So, the Enterprise is in orbit around the planet Neural. And as mentioned, Neural, I guess, was supposed to be a play on the word neutral. Again, not terribly subtle or clever, but I guess it works. McCoy's collecting some soil samples and whatnot, and talking about how abundant, the vegetation is, that sort of thing. Kirk and Spock are also discussing the planet and how it's kind of a Garden of Eden. It's very peaceful, very lush, plenty of water, plenty of food. There are no large predators on the planet aside from a large white ape called a Mugato. And the inhabitants of this planet are generally very peaceful. They're not generally violent. They do hunt, but they don't war amongst themselves. They largely have separate tribes that live peacefully. And it's mentioned that Kirk came to this planet, I think they said 13 years earlier, as a lieutenant, leading his first landing party to do a survey of the planet. Now, during that previous visit, he met Tyree, who was a member of the Plains people, and they became friends and blood brothers. Then Spock notices some animal tracks, and he points them out in the dirt here, and they realize these are Mugato tracks. Now, I may be wrong, but I am pretty, like 99% certain these are the tracks of the white rabbit in Shore Leave. It's like the same shot, the same tracks that they just stuck into this episode. There actually was a lot of footage reused for this episode. And again, that's something I'll get into behind the scenes. But I'm pretty sure that's what these are. They look very much like that same shot from Shore Leave. And I'm sure that the Mugato won't come up later. That won't figure into the plot in any way. So they're discussing the planet, and then they see a group of tribesmen And they notice that they are now before Kirk had said that their cultures are pretty primitive. They're basically still at almost like a Stone Age level. They use bows and arrows and spears. They don't have anything much more advanced than that. They really haven't started forging iron yet. They aren't to the Iron Age yet. And yet they see some of these guys waiting in ambush with what appear to be flintlock muskets. And then they realize that they're lying in wait to ambush a group of the Plains people. That's the people Kirk had met before. And Kirk recognizes that one of the men in the Plains people group is his old friend Tyree. He doesn't want them to be harmed, so initially he grabs for his phaser, but Spock reminds him that the use of phasers is being forbidden on this mission. They don't want to use phasers in front of these people. So Kirk grabs a rock and throws it at the hill people who are waiting in ambush. When it hits the rocks around them, one of them accidentally fires his gun. Then they see Kirk and Spock and come after them. So Kirk and Spock run for it. One of them fires and shoots Spock in the back. And he is seriously wounded. Kirk is able to get him up. Again, he wants to use his phaser, but Spock tells him, no, it's all right. Let's just get out of here. So they reunite with McCoy. McCoy orders a beam out. Back up on the Enterprise. And again, this is written by Gene Roddenberry. And so you see down there, story by Judd Crucis. So the actual story was originally done by a guy named Don Ingalls. And again, I'll get into this more in the behind the scenes, but so much of his original story was basically changed through various rewrites that he asked for his name to be removed from this. And again, I'll get into that later. Directed by Mark Daniels, again, one of the two main directors for Star Trek, along with Joseph Pevney. So a medical team comes with a stretcher. They get Spock on there, and we're introduced to Dr. Mbenga for the first time. And they begin to work on Spock. Then Kirk gets a message from the bridge, and they're told that a Klingon ship has appeared in orbit around the planet. So he goes to the bridge. Now, they tell Kirk that when the Klingon ship appeared, they moved behind the planet, so they don't think the Klingons are aware of their presence yet. Now, with the arrival of the Klingons, of course, Kirk is wondering how they came to have muskets, since they didn't even have, like, swords yet last time, say 13 years ago. And he suspects that the Klingons may be supplying the Hill people with these weapons. Now, Scotty and Uhura and Chekhov all kind of question this, but he's not really interested in a debate about it. And this is important because if they are supplying weapons to the Hill people, this is a violation of the Organian Peace Treaty, and that could eventually lead to a war with the Klingons. So there are some significant stakes that are established here early on. Now, Spock's surgery is performed by Dr. Mbenga, but Spock is still weak and he may still die. Kirk comes to sickbay to check on him. He is, of course, very worried about Spock, but McCoy assures Kirk that Mbenga has spent time on Vulcan, and he knows about as much about Vulcans as anyone who isn't a Vulcan themselves, and Spock cannot be in better hands. Kirk then decides to return to the planet to contact Tyree and the Plains people, and then investigate this and see if the Klingons are indeed responsible for the flintlocks. Now, this carries some risk because in order to avoid the notice of the Klingon ship, they may have to break orbit abruptly and then move beyond communicator range, which would leave Kirk and McCoy stranded on the planet. So Kirk orders a rendezvous to be planned. In addition, contacting the natives is a violation of their mission, as they were told only to observe and not make contact with the inhabitants. Kirk and McCoy beam down, disguised as natives, and they approach the village, but then A Mugato attacks, and Kirk is bitten. Again, the Mugato have a venomous bite. McCoy then phasers the Mugato, killing it, but Kirk is poisoned and he is dying. McCoy calls the Enterprise, but there's no answer, and they realize the Enterprise has had to move away out of communicator range so they can't beam up. Now, Kirk tells McCoy that Tyree's people have a cure for the Mugatu bite and says to contact them. And then, almost as if on cue, McCoy looks up and there's a bunch of plains people. And McCoy pleads with them to take Kirk to their village because the Mugatu bite. So they take him to the village, and one of them runs off to find Tyree, who is the chieftain of these plains people now, and he is not present. Meanwhile, they put Kirk in a cave. And McCoy is watching over him. So then we meet Tyree, who is the chieftain of the plains people, and his wife, Nona. Now, Nona is what they refer to as a Canutu, and she's, I guess, from another tribe. And she is this kind of shaman and healer type character. And they observe a group of the Hills people from hiding. And after they move on, his wife urges Tyree to acquire more rifles, or rifles like they have, so that they can turn the tide of battle and defeat them. But Tyree is reluctant to do this, arguing that the natives will find a way to resolve this conflict peacefully as they have in the past. Nona rubs this herb over him and has him sniff it. This plant seems to be some kind of an aphrodisiac, as it gets Tyree really amorous all of a sudden. You get the idea that he may be addicted to it also. And so they start getting busy, but then the messenger arrives, much to Nona's annoyance, and tells them about Kirk's arrival. But Tyree is pretty much just kind of in a daze from this plant. So Nona says she'll go meet them and tells the messenger to bring Tyree along after his head is cleared up. And hello, Unturned. They were immigrants. Okay. They need the Constitution. Yeah. Well, they get into that kind of in, what is it, Omega Glory. Or, well, I guess that was the Declaration of Independence they had in that, not the Constitution, but kind of the same idea. Okay, so she goes to the village. Now, Kirk is in bad shape. McCoy tries to keep him warm by using a phaser to heat the rocks in the cave and create a warm environment. Now, Nona arrives and sees him using the phaser on the rocks. Then she slips away, and then Tyree arrives, and he urges Nona to save Kirk, but she tells Tyree that she can't save him unless she knows everything about him. And, Tyree, I guess, had told her about Kirk and that they were blood brothers, but I guess didn't tell her everything, so he spills everything to her now that they are not from this world, that they are from somewhere else, and that they have a very advanced civilization and all this stuff that he had sworn never to reveal. Now, back on the Enterprise, Chapel is concerned about Spock. She's holding his hand, but then Dr. Mabinga enters, and she quickly releases his hand, not wanting to be caught holding it. He then tells her that she shouldn't be too worried about Spock's vitals, which are very low, as he says Vulcans are able to channel their body's resources, such as antibodies and blood, into injured areas. And this is actually very similar to the Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit in Dune can do that sort of thing. And this isn't the first time or the only time that Vulcans and Bene Gesserit seem to have some parallels. And Snortapoopa says Nancy Kovac. Yeah, she was a looker, to be sure. And Unturned says, and people think Star Trek is weird. Yeah, go figure. Let's see. All right, he describes this self-healing as a kind of self-hypnosis and adds that Spock is probably aware of his surroundings, including what they're saying, and says that he's probably also aware that Chapel was holding his hand. So he caught her, which leaves Chapel very embarrassed. Unturned says, original Black Doctor. Yeah. Well, he is the first Black Doctor on Trek, to be sure. And I'll talk about him. Apparently, that actor, he he played a lot of Black Doctors, apparently, on a lot of shows. Okay, so back on the planet, Tyree and Nona enter the cave, and she performs this ritual to cure Kirk, which involves her placing this plant she calls a maca root on the wound, which I don't know. It looks like a rubber dog turd to me, but what do I know? And also having her hand cut, and that she places her bleeding hand over the root. She then goes into this kind of ceremony, and I gotta say, for 1960s TV, this gets pretty interesting. I mean, she's kind of writhing and moaning. It makes it about as sexual as you can without them actually doing anything. It's like she's trying to, I don't know, it's like she's making content for her OnlyFans or something. However, when the ceremony is concluded, the wound is healed, and even the wound on her hand is healed as well. Then she tells McCoy that their blood has been joined and that Kirk is hers now. McCoy asks what that means, and Tyree says that when a woman and a man's blood are mingled in this way, the man cannot resist the woman and will fulfill her every request. But then he adds that that's just a legend, so, no need to worry, right? Okay. Now, later, Kirk awakens and he is reunited with Tyree. He tells McCoy that the healers in their cultures are a tribe, called the Canutu. Yeah, I mentioned that. And then he meets Nona, who tells Kirk that she's the one that saved him. Kirk, Kirk isn't really, he doesn't really come across as all that appreciative. She's like, "I saved your life," and he's like, "Oh yeah, cool story. Yeah, nice to meet you." He just kind of brushes her off. So Tyree tells Kirk that much has happened since his visit, and they leave to discuss the matter further. Nona wants to join them, but Tyree stops her, basically tells her, "No, babe, this is man talk." Now, back on the Enterprise, Spock's vital signs begin fluctuating, and Mbinga says that this is normal. He tells Chapel to call him if Spock regains consciousness, and that if Spock gives her any instructions, she should obey them, even if they sound very strange. Back on the planet, Tyree tells Kirk that the rifles, or fire sticks as they call them, appeared on their world about a year ago, and that many of his people have died because of them. He tells Kirk that the other tribe, the Hill people, make the fire sticks themselves, and he knows this because he has spied on their village and seen it being done. And he says this because McCoy and Kirk ask him, "Have you seen anyone, have you seen any strangers in the village?" And he says, no, he hasn't. Kirk asks if it would be possible to travel to the village. Tyree says they can, but also says that, night is falling and that's when the Megatu are out hunting, so it would be kind of dangerous to do it. Then Nona barges in and she says that she knows Kirk has weapons that are far more powerful than fire sticks, and he can make Tyree a powerful man. She then reveals that Tyree told him everything about Kirk, and that he comes from one of the lights in the sky, and Tyree warns her not to speak of this to anyone else. Now, she says she won't if the reasons why she shouldn't are made clear to her. And Kirk explains, basically, he doesn't say the words, but he's basically talking about the Prime Directive, telling her that, as he put it, one time mankind's weapons grew greater than our wisdom, and we nearly destroyed ourselves. And now we're careful not to cause something similar to happen on other worlds. Now, Nona questions Kirk's loyalty to Tyree, asking if he's willing to stand by while the other tribe slaughters them, and demands that Kirk give them the weapons they need to fight back. But Tyree refuses, saying that he will not kill anyone. Then Nona storms out, saying that Tyree has the wrong friends and she has the wrong husband. At this point, Tyree suggests going to check out the other village, and he leaves. Now, Kirk is clearly kind of shaken by her accusations, and McCoy says that if they find out the Klingons are supplying the rifles, there are steps they can take to help, and Kirk says that that's what he's worried about. They may have to get involved and start supplying Tyree's people with rifles of their own, which he is reluctant to do. Now, at the other village, we see that the Klingons are indeed supplying the other tribe with rifles. The Klingon supplier says that when he returns, he will bring better rifles with improvements. And this Klingon, I tell you, the guy looks like Eddie Munster's older brother. Now, they sneak into the village. Kirk subdues a guard, and then they find what appears to be a forge for manufacturing the rifles. But McCoy scans some of the metal that they've got and says that the carbon content in the rifle barrels they find is much too high for it to have been made by such a primitive forge. Which means it is likely that the weapons are coming from somewhere else. They aren't really making them themselves, which again suggests Klingon involvement. Then they hear voices coming and they hide. The Klingon enters with Apella, who is the chieftain of the Hill people. And the Klingon tells Apella that eventually he will rule this whole world if he continues to cooperate with the Klingons. Then McCoy's tricorder goes off and makes a sound. They move to investigate, so Kirk jumps out and attacks the Klingon, knocking him out. Then they knock out Apella and they flee with one of the flintlocks while the villagers chase after them. Now, back on the Enterprise, Spock awakens and asks Chapel to hit him, saying that the pain will help him focus. And Chapel refuses at first, but Spock urges her, so she reluctantly begins slapping him. And then Scotty enters, sees what she's doing, and then he pulls her away and stops her. But then Mabinga arrives, and he knows what to do, so he just starts smacking the hell out of Spock like he owes Mabinga money. Now, after a few blows, Spock says he's recovered, and he explains to Scotty that it was part of a Vulcan method of self-healing. I did like this face he makes here. That will be quite sufficient, Doctor. Thank you. Now, back in the village, Kirk is now showing Tyree and his people how to fire the flintlock rifle that they took the night before. McCoy demands to speak with Kirk, and they go into a cave to talk, and McCoy is not happy about it. He's furious. Furious that Kirk is teaching them how to use these weapons, and he accuses Kirk of being under Nona's influence, since this is just what she wanted. Kirk rejects that idea as superstition and argues that they have to restore a technological balance between the tribes. But McCoy says that by doing that, Kirk is dooming their society to a war that could get them all killed. Kirk makes a comparison to the Vietnam War and how the superpowers of the time kept arming both sides in order to achieve a balance of power, and argues that that approach is the only thing that will work in this situation. Kirk asks if Tyree will understand, and Kirk says that he'll have to make Tyree understand somehow. He suggests that he can use Nona to convince Tyree to cooperate, so he goes looking for her and finds her near a waterfall. She gets him to sniff the planet or I'm sorry, sniff the plant on Tyree that she had used earlier. And like Tyree, he becomes kind of dazed and kind of enters into a trance. And then they get into a rather snug embrace here. Tyree arrives and sees this. He is angered, so he aims his flintlock to shoot Kirk, but he cannot bring himself to do it. And ultimately, he throws the rifle down in disgust and leaves. And then a wild Mugatu attacks and tries to kill Nona, but Kirk uses his phaser and he kills it. Kirk is still under the influence of the plant, though, and Nona is able to knock Kirk unconscious with a rock, and she steals the phaser and flees with it. Now, back in the village, McCoy asks where Kirk and the rifle are, and Tyree takes them back to the waterfall. While they're doing this, Nona confronts some of the hill people and demands that they take her to Apella, promising that she has a weapon that is far more powerful than fire sticks. They don't believe her, and they assault her instead in a pretty unsettling way. Again, this seems to really be kind of pushing the envelope of what you could do on TV back then. Now, Kirk realizes that his phaser has been stolen, so they go looking for Nona. They arrive to find them attacking Nona and thinking that she's set them up for an ambush. One of the hill people pulls out a knife and stabs Nona in the chest, or at least as close as you can get to it in 1960s broadcast TV without, the censors pulling the scene. Then they fire on Kirk and the others. McCoy gets wounded while a melee breaks out between Tyree's tribe and the others. Tyree grabs a large natives, but Kirk stops him. Now, afterwards, they discover that Nona is dead, and Tyree then demands more rifles from Kirk, swearing that he's going to kill them as revenge for killing Nona. McCoy finds Kirk's phaser and returns it like, here's stupid, here's your phaser. Although, to be fair, in a couple episodes, they're going to do a piece of the action, and McCoy's going to leave his communicator behind on that planet. So I guess he couldn't be too judgmental. And he says, well, I guess you got what you wanted here. And Kirk says he never wanted it. It's just the way things have to be. Then he calls the Enterprise, and Spock answers. McCoy asks if Spock is really alive, and Spock responds that that is an entirely illogical question since they're speaking to him, so clearly he is alive. Kirk asks how long it will take to manufacture 100 flintlocks, and Scotty is confused and asks for clarification. And Kirk then says he wants 100 serpents for the Garden of Eden. And the episode ends there. And this episode, I'll give it, I think an A- is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's a great episode by any means, but it is pretty solid. And Unturned says these old scientists were monsters. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about the making of this episode now. Let's see, pull that out. Okay, so again, this was the original story for this episode was by Don Ingalls, although his name is not attributed to the story that originally when the episode airs. So following the horrific rewriting of his first Star Trek script, and that was the alternative factor from season 1, which I think is pretty easily the worst episode of the first season. So if he wasn't pleased, I can't really fault him for that, which was reluctantly gutted by Gene Coon due to censorship and casting issues. Don Ingalls believed he had suffered again with Gene Roddenberry's rewrite on A Private Little War. Ingalls remained friends with Roddenberry, but was so disturbed over the handling of the script that he removed his name from the episode. The story credit reads Judd Cruces, and it is popular. There's a popular rumor that has circulated ever since that Judd Cruces is basically supposed to mean Jesus crucified. The story had been under the microscope since Roddenberry first assigned it to Ingalls. So in April of 1967, Roddenberry wrote to Gene Coon, quote, I had a meeting with Don and discussed some ideas which seemed to catch his imagination, but this one seems to be going very slowly. It's possible we should ask for a meeting with Don and see what he's up to and where he is at on it. At this point, the episode didn't really have a title. After the meeting between Roddenberry, Coon, and Ingalls, there were still differences of opinion, but they at least came down with the title and the general premise of the episode. So the original title for this episode was Tyree's Woman. The planet is called Neural, again, and the people were Neuralese. What makes a man turn neutral? The Klingons in this story represented the communist influence in the Cold Wars of 1967 Earth. The Federation took the role of the United States. The message was clear, and so were Kirk's limited powers. At one point, comparing himself to his Klingon counterpart, Kirk tells McCoy, I'm like him, Bones. I obey orders, and I hope my way is right. This little war has been fought a million times before in a million different places, and will be fought a million more times, and there isn't a damn thing you or I can do about it. But in this little war, it happens that my orders are to help these people and keep the other side from winning, and that's what I intend to do. Now, this speech, of course, was greatly changed through rewrites, and it doesn't appear in this form in the episode that is aired. And again, as usual, there were a succession of rewrites. I'm not going to go through them all. Some of them are minor, and it just going through it all would stretch this out. So I'm going to kind of just touch on some select changes. Now, one thing that happened was Gene Coon was still the producer of the show. In fact, this is the last episode that Gene Coon produced. And when this episode was in the development stages, he was still very keen on the idea of having a recurring enemy for Kirk. And so in early rewrites, he actually brought in or wanted Kor, the Klingon from, what do you call it? The one with the Organians. God, I always forget the name of that episode. I'm blanking on the name of the episode now, but the one played by Baltar. What's his name? John Colicos. But and he had wanted Kor in The Trouble with Tribbles as well, but he was not available for that one, and so they wound up getting what's his name, who played Trelane, Jonathan Campbell, I think it was his name. But when he put Kor into this screenplay, Robert Justman, one of the producers, nixed that and said, it's just, considering how vast space is, it's a little too hard to believe that these guys keep bumping into one another, with all the planets and the vastness of space. And so he didn't want there to be a recurring villain. Justman was also nervous over the projected cost of this episode, and sent a memo saying, if you go to screenplay with this story in its present form, I'll start writing longer and more involved memos. Now, not wanting longer and more involved memos from Justman, Coon chose to have Don Ingalls restructure the story, which was then revised again. On the third attempt at an outline, Dorothy Fontana wrote to Coon saying on June 8th, quote, the story is much improved. However, I wish the story did not bear such a strong resemblance to Friday's Child. Is there any point in bringing in the Romulans rather than the Klingons? Is there any point to making the Neuralese less Arabic and perhaps more Mongolian or something? Kuhn followed Fontana's suggestion regarding the description of the Neuralese, but he was set on the idea of making the Klingons the villains, even as Justman had talked him out of using core. And Snortapoopa says, one of the few episodes with a sad ending. Yeah, kinda. I mean, I guess you could say it's sad. I would call it more downbeat, but yeah, you could say that. Now, at this point in the story, it was Kirk, not Spock, who was wounded in the teaser. Of this, Justman told Kuhn, quote, let's have a security man or some nondescript fellow get killed or wounded by the pursuers. Let's not have Kirk get wounded at all, or we're going to have difficulty believing that Nona can cure Kirk of a bullet wound by using homeopathic medicine later in the episode. Instead, we should have Captain Kirk wounded by the creature he encounters with the others as we proceed along into Act 1. So it was decided that Spock would take the bullet, and going with Justman's suggestion, Kirk would fall victim to the Megato's poisonous fangs and need saving by Nona. Roddenberry, however, didn't feel Ingalls was utilizing the Jonathan Swift aspects of Star Trek well enough and told Kuhn, quote, Don had a good Vietnam parallel in this, but somehow I sense something is missing. Perhaps it is not carrying the parallel all the way, i.e. the Viet Cong situation. If either side makes a mistake, there will be a worldwide disaster. So the stakes are terribly great. In this story, however, the stakes seem merely that Earth or the Klingons will prove that the other side is a cheater, and there will be angry words, but it will end there. Okay. Now, before the next draft, it would be decided that Nona, with her seductive waves and by rubbing the leaf of a mysterious plant on the skin of her intended victim, could leave a man confused and disoriented as well as submissive. And that is, let's see, where are they? Here we go. Yeah, so this plant that's introduced in the story. So apparently in the original story, this plant wasn't there. But, later in the episode, when Nona overpowers Kirk and takes his phaser, basically they made the change and introduced the plant as a way to kind of justify that she's able to take advantage of Kirk in this weak moment and steal the phaser instead of basically just clocking him and then running off with it. Okay, now Kuhn did a subsequent script polish, which was titled The Final Draft. This was in early September. Now, just a couple of weeks later, in mid-September, Kuhn would resign as the producer. Although he would remain in the office, tutoring his replacement, John Meredith Lucas, and rewriting the upcoming episode, A Piece of the Action. And the teleplay for A Private Little War was handed off to Gene Roddenberry. Roddenberry's first work on the script cleared his typewriter on September 20th. Don Ingalls said, quote, mine was more of an adventure in a vacuum. Gene's was more of a political statement. His story was more tilted to parallel Vietnam than I had intended. Credit Roddenberry then, in spite of heavy-handed writing and preaching, for the most important aspect of A Private Little War, a strong political statement. John Meredith Lucas, pleased to see A Private Little War on the production schedule, said, quote, I was intrigued by the opportunity to say anything. We were doing anti-Vietnam War shows long before it was popular with many people, including the network, not realizing what we were saying. NBC's broadcast standards and practices saw what was going on, with some of Roddenberry's dialogue ruffling the network's feathers. A September 25th letter from the Broadcast and Standards Department told Lucas that they would not air the dialogue, which at that point closed the script, where McCoy says to Kirk, you got what you wanted, and a bitter Kirk retorts, yes, I did. A war that might go on for 40 years, with thousands dead. Yes, I might even get a medal out of it. Lines like these were changed by Roddenberry, with revisions dated September 26, 27, 28, ending just one day before the start of filming. Kirk tells Scotty to make 100 flintlocks to be sent down to the planet, then says 100 serpents. With this, Kirk leaves the order kind of hanging in the air. We would never know if the delivery was made. Kirk says that he and McCoy are tired and asks to be beamed out. By the time all the rewriting had finished, there was too little of Ingalls' script for him to get the screenplay or get the teleplay credit. Roddenberry would get that. Ingalls was assigned the story by credit as determined by the arbitration board of the Writers Guild. Ingalls' reaction both to the rewriting and the WGA decision was to give instructions for his name to be removed and a pseudonym to be used for the screen credit. Judd Crucis. Let's go back to that. There we go. Now, Ingalls said that it didn't mean Jesus crucifies as rumors had it. Instead, it was a reference to the Latin term judicius crucis, which, as he explained it, describes a form of combat in which two kings would send out their two knights or champions to battle each other rather than two armies. And whoever won the fight won the war. So, that kind of thing where two armies choose a champion and then they fight to decide the conflict instead of a war where hundreds or thousands are going to be killed. Now, director Mark Daniels said, quote, I remember that episode provided a problem in terms of wardrobe. The people on this planet were supposed to be dressed in prehistoric clothing, and we discovered that costuming them would cost a fortune. Bill Theiss, who was always adept at handling such crises, bought a bunch of cheap sheepskin jackets and then cut off the sleeves and turned them inside out. And I'm assuming he means the garb of the hill people. You kind of see it here. We are always trying to work around things like that because of budget limitations. Now, Michael Whitney was one of the actors in this sheepskin jacket, and he played Tyree. There we go. And there's Tyree. He was 36 and he had been on TV since the early 1960s. He had been a regular on the 1963-64 series, The Travels of Jamie McFeeters, with a young Kurt Russell as the title character, and also featuring Charles Bronson among the regulars. And one episode also included Meg Wiley, who would play the keeper, the main Telosian in The Cage. And Don Ingalls was one of the producers on that show. Now, during the time when Star Trek was made, Whitney was featured prominently in the big screen hit The Way West with Sally Field and Kirk Douglas, Robert Mitchum, and Richard Widmark. He also had plum roles in films such as Darling Lily in 1970, in Doc in 1971, where he played Ike Clanton, and then took the lead in the film Head On in 1971. He would later meet and marry Twiggy, if you remember Twiggy. She was his wife, actually. Now, Nancy Kovac played Nona. She was a familiar face on television during this time. She was 32 at the time this episode was made. By the time she was 20, Kovac had won 8 different beauty contests. She began work on television. She was kind of the Vanna White of her time. One of her first jobs on TV was on a game show called Number Please, where she was basically the show was kind of a predecessor to Wheel of Fortune. I guess kind of like Vanna, she would turn numbers or something. Her film career included The Great Sioux Massacre, where she played Libby Custer. She played Medea in Jason and the Argonauts. And she was in the Three Stooges' last film, The Outlaws Is Comin', playing Annie Oakley. Now, Kovac was in such demand that in the 2 years leading up to her appearance in this episode of Star Trek, she appeared in 5 films, including The Silencers with Dean Martin, and 9 guest starring roles on TV, including episodes of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Invaders, I Spy, The FBI, 2 episodes of Batman. Gene Kuhn was impressed by Kovac and took her along for 2 appearances on his next show, It Takes a Thief. Shortly after that, she appeared on Mannix, and for that episode of Mannix, she would get an Emmy nomination. Now, Booker Bradshaw played Dr. Mabinga. Let's see here. Here he is. Actually, maybe I can get a better image of him here. Let's see. Maybe. Yeah, I guess that's a little better. He played Dr. Mabinga, standing in for Dr. McCoy in sickbay. So Mr. Bradshaw was only 27 at the time, but his scholarly demeanor made him a popular choice when a black actor was needed to play a doctor. During that same year, Bradshaw portrayed another doctor on an episode of Tarzan. As Bradshaw remembered, I was hired by Gene Roddenberry for Star Trek. But I didn't want to play a doctor. I came from a family of doctors, and that year I played one on 5 different TV shows, including Tarzan and The Girl from Uncle. Bradshaw would return for another episode of Star Trek, That Which Survives. Now, Ned Romero played the villainous Klingon Krell. There's a good shot of him. There he is. He was 41 and had been working regularly in TV, usually in westerns, playing American Indians and Mexican cowboys and bandits. Within a year in either direction of this production, he would play Wild Bear in the telefilm Winchester 73, Charlie Blackfoot in the Clint Eastern western Hang 'em High, and on television as Running Feet on Custer, White Wolf on Bonanza, Zawuda on The Virginian, and Chief Running in a Circle on Death Valley Days. This suited Romero fine, as he was actually part Chitimacha Indian. Or Chitimacha, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Romero had been a semi-regular in TV's version of Shane in 1966 and was a regular on Burt Reynolds' 1970-71 series Dan August as Sergeant Joe Rivera. In 1975, he starred as Chief Joseph, the lead role in I Will Fight No More, a well-received movie about the plight of the American Indian. Romero would return to Star Trek for the 1994 Star Trek Next Generation episode Journey's End. And I guess he played one of those native, in that episode, Picard's got this dilemma because of the treaty with the Cardassians, there's this Federation planet that is now on the Cardassian side of the border. But that planet is inhabited by, descendants of Native Americans. But now they're under Cardassian rule, and the Cardassians are, I guess, mistreating them or planning to mistreat them or something. And Picard is basically told to remove these people from their land. The historical parallel is pretty obvious, right? And I guess he must have played one of those characters. And he also appeared on the Star Trek Voyager episode The Fight. Now, Hungarian actor Janos Prohaska, who was 48, played the Mugato. Well, yeah, here, let me skip ahead here. There we go. So he designed, fabricated, and wore the ape-like suit. Prohaska had last been seen on Star Trek as the Horta in The Devil in the Dark, playing apes and bears. So he was a guy, his whole thing was making costumes of creatures and then playing them. He apparently played bears and apes a lot on TV at this time. And he was, if you remember in The Cage, when Pike is first, in the prison, he sees these other enclosures and there's like a bird creature and some other kind of creature. So it was Prohaska in those outfits too. He also played the Hoarder, and he would play the Excalbion in Savage Curtain as well. He appeared as an ape in 3 different episodes of Gilligan's Island. He would play a gorilla in 2 episodes of Land of the Giants and Darwin the monkey in The Sixth Finger for an episode of The Outer Limits. But his most frequent job was playing the Cookie Bear on The Andy Williams Show. Majel Barrett returned to this episode as Nurse Chapel. Let's see. And she appeared in the episode. She wasn't originally included in the episode, but she was added in when Roddenberry did rewrites, which isn't surprising. Okay, so for day 1 of filming, the first day of filming was on the bridge and the transporter room and the medical room and sick bay. Now, Booker Bradshaw recalled that that line where Dr. McCoy says, "Thank God his heart is where his liver is, or he'd be dead by now," took us over 50 takes to get right. We couldn't get through that line without laughing. And when we finally stopped laughing and got it right, the cameraman laughed and shook the camera on the 50th take, so we had to do it again. Let me go back to that scene. Actually, just move that. Actually, I was wrong. So let me go back to that other one. Go back to earlier in that episode. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so all the hijinks resulted in the Friday afternoon filming running late. Leonard Nimoy, who had little to do for these scenes other than lie on a table, was growing impatient. Now, according to Bradshaw, the Texas State Fair had offered Nimoy, quote, a fortune to fly and appear as Spock for 10 minutes at their fair. Before starting the final scene of the day, where Dr. Mbinga was to repeatedly slap Spock in an effort to bring him out of a self-induced coma, Nimoy explained to Bradshaw that as soon as the scene was filmed, he was going to hop on a bicycle and ride to a waiting helicopter, then take the helicopter to a plane, and then fly to Texas. Bradshaw remembered Nimoy saying, "Look, we all laughed over the heart and liver thing, but we're not going to laugh over this scene. When you slap me, make sure that it's realistic. Don't do a stage slap. I want you to really hit me. I want to get this scene done right, and I want to do it the first time." So when the director called for action, Bradshaw rushed into sickbay where Spock, who was still laying on the bed in a coma, and giving instructions to Nurse Chapel to strike him. So Bradshaw then ran in, stepped between Nimoy and Majel Barrett, raised his hand, and he says, quote, "I never slapped anyone as hard as I hit Nimoy, and I hit him so hard that his ears flew off." There was mass hysteria on the set. People were rolling on the floor. The cameraman was in convulsions. Leonard was really pissed off. He started chasing me around the set saying, "I'm going to kill you." And I'm yelling, "Look, I did what you told me to do." And the director was saying, "What's going on? Don't you understand what a stage slap is?" And I said, "Look, I wanted to be a classical actor. I don't need this." So Nimoy had to go back into makeup and get his ears put back on. And then they had to reshoot the scene again, this time with a stage slap. And all is well that ended well, or more or less. So once the scene was done, Nimoy was in a hurry to leave for Texas. So then he began looking for his bicycle, which was missing. The lighting crew, acting on instructions from Shatner, had hoisted the bike up into the rafters. Nimoy said, "Bill Shatner enjoys practical jokes. I guess the bicycle stories by now are legendary. He often hid my bicycle time after time. I guess there's something funny about audiences picturing Leonard Nimoy as Spock riding a bicycle in the first place. And I guess it's funny that Leonard Nimoy as Spock running around looking for it was also kind of funny. People seem to love that story." Okay, so this was a Friday, so then they took a weekend off. Now on Monday, when filming resumed with Nimoy back from the Texas State Fair, they traveled out to do the location shooting at a place called Bell Ranch, which is in between San Fernando Valley and Simi Valley. Now, on location during these days was Charles Washburn, who was in his first year working for Star Trek as an assistant director, with Star Trek being the first series to hire a black man to work in that position. Washburn said, quote, I had interviewed to be an assistant director at an NBC affiliate because some production friends told me they wanted to hire a black man for the control room, but they never called me back. Months later, I wrote to my friend asking who got the job, and he said they never hired anyone. They never wanted to. They just wanted to be able to tell people they were looking for a black person. The guy didn't use black person. He used something else, but I'm not going to say it here because I don't think YouTube would like it. But it was a different situation at NBC Burbank, where Stan Robertson, who was himself a black man, was promoted to the first black network production manager. Charlie Washburn worked under the various visiting directors. He said, the crew and casting director on the lot called me Charlie Star Trek. Working closely with all the extras was a big part of the job, even to the point of knowing who would be getting a bump or double whammy, which is what we called an added amount of time on a extra's base pay if he or she was given some pertinent story business. Also, this was the first episode. Let me go to some of the location stuff. Yeah. So this was actually the first episode Mark Daniels did where he did any outside location shooting, which surprises me considering that he had done more Star Treks than just about anyone up to this point. And now they say here in the book, and I don't think I captured it in any of the screenshots. Let me see here. Yeah, I don't think I caught them, but they say in the book here that in some of the scenes here where known as talking with the hill people, that I guess there's a shot where you can see buildings in the background behind the hills, but I never noticed them myself. I'll have to go back and rewatch it and see if I can find them. Now, Nancy Kovac, she said, I thought William Shatner was very underrated. He was wonderful, very professional, and a lot of fun to work with. He could be played with, and he really had a lot of technique. I was always envious of people who had worked long enough to develop multiple techniques, and he had and still has, and I love to watch that applied. So it was really fascinating to me as an actor to watch him work while I was there. And again, on the screen, I'd say, oh, there he goes. He uses all these little techniques, and they are all very subtle. Regarding the shots of Nona bathing in the stream, okay, so when Shatner goes looking for Nona, and again, I didn't get a screenshot of it, but right before this shot here, there's a scene where Kirk sees Nona through some bushes, and her little furry vest is off. Now she's holding it up against her chest, it seems like, but her, she's not wearing it, so her back is completely bare. Now, apparently, the actress Nancy Kovac says that was not her. That was actually, I guess, a body double of some kind. Kovac said, I had to get up at 3:45 in the morning to wash my hair and set my hair in rollers and arrive on the set an hour later at 6 a.m. And I was there on the dot. So by the time 8 or 9 p.m. would roll around, I was exhausted. But I had to learn the lines for the next day and then go to bed by 11 to get up at 3:45 a.m. again. So there's not much left to concentrate on outside of what you have to do on the sets. And you have to be alert on the sets. Now, Mark Daniels was able to bring this episode in on time and under budget, which was unusual for a Star Trek episode. Desilu was happy with the episode, but NBC was not. So on November 2nd, Stan Robertson at NBC wrote to producer John Meredith Lucas, quote, the rough cut viewed by us on Tuesday afternoon was, in the form which we were screened, is unacceptable. We realize, John, that the episode in question was not produced by you, but as a guideline for the future, we must reiterate our position about the costuming, the implied sex, and the forms of violence, as we discussed, and they are totally unacceptable to NBC for airing over our facilities. Among the stuff that was trimmed from the episode were Nona's fur-skinned outfit, which didn't always sufficiently cover up her figure. For example, it's often been cited that around this time you couldn't show navels on network television. Women couldn't show their navels. And of course, most famously probably is Barbara Eden, whose outfit covered up her navel. I don't know, do we have a good shot of her? Because you can see her navel in this. I guess I don't have a good shot of it, but her navel is definitely visible in this episode. Let's see. So yeah, the scene where Nona is bathing in a pond, the attack of the Mugato, the graphic killing of Nona, and the battle between Tyree Kirk and the villagers at the end. Robert Jessman said, "A private little war was eventually approved by broadcast and standards. Surprisingly, Stan Robertson never seemed to realize that the story was supposed to be an allegory about the growing police action in Vietnam. In fact, no one at NBC made the connection and took us to task for it. But the audience did, and we got letters, lots of letters." Now, in the end titles or end credits of the episode, yeah, let me bring that up here. I believe that's, yeah, here. So in the end titles of the episode, Janos Prohaska is credited with playing the Gumato, not the Mugato. And apparently it was called Gumato in the screenplay. But when they were on location filming it, apparently DeForest Kelley was having real trouble saying Gumato, and he kept saying Mugato instead. And so eventually they just kind of gave up and said, okay, just call it a Mugato. So that's why in the episode it's called a Mugato, but in the credits it's a Gumato. And also as a couple of little weird sort of anecdotes to this. So Janos Prohaska, in the comics, some of you may know there's a character called Blackhawk. Now, originally, when the character was created back in the 40s, his name was Bart Hawk originally, but in the 80s, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, the character's identity and background were changed. And instead of being American, he's identified as originally being Polish. And in this Polish version, his real name is Janos Prohaska. So I guess they got the name from this actor. And also, if you've ever seen Derek Zoolander, the villain in that, Mugatu, the evil fashion designer, that's where his name comes from. It comes from the Mugato. Okay. Okay, now also in the end titles, Gene Coon's credit appears. And you don't really see it in this episode. I don't think I included a shot of it, but in the original episode, in the closing shot, the Enterprise is flying away from the planet as Gene Coon's name comes up as producer. So, but the planet in the shot is not the same planet that we've seen earlier in the episode. And the reason for that is, I guess, when the effects people were doing the credits, they put John Meredith Lucas as the producer. But he was not the producer yet. Coon was still the producer. So they had to fix that. And they didn't have time or the money, I guess, to do another, to redo that shot. So what they did is they pulled a shot from Cat's Paw, from the episode Cat's Paw, that showed Coon as producer at the end, and they put that in the episode. So it's actually a different planet in the closing shot of that episode. And yeah, after this episode, Coon would depart Star Trek, at least as producer. There were still some episodes that he co-wrote. And of course, a lot of the episodes, he also, he did the writing assignments and stuff like that. So he still had an influence on the show after this, at least for the rest of this season. And of course, his influence on Star Trek was pivotal. I did a stream about Gene Coon a few streams back. I recommend looking at that if you want to know more about him and the circumstances of his departure. This was the final production credit Coon would receive on the series. Up next for Coon, he would work at Universal, starting with a film screenplay, Journey to Shiloh. Then he would serve as writer-producer for the series It Takes a Thief. After that, he would write a script for producer Robert Justman on the series Then Came Bronson, and collaborate with Gene Roddenberry on the TV movie The Quester Tapes, which would be aired after Coon's death in 1974. Coon died on July 8th, 1973 of lung cancer. He was 49 years old and went too soon. It's a real shame. If he had lived, he likely would have had some involvement in at least the first Star Trek film. And it's interesting to speculate what that movie would have been like if he had been there. One would think it would have been a little more lively, maybe, but then again, Roddenberry might have prevented that. I don't know. Don Ingalls, for his part, did not ask for any more Star Trek assignments and was not offered any more. He would work with William Shatner. Then again, though, he would be a producer on T.J. Hooker at one point. The last producer for that show, actually. Come on now. Okay, so this episode aired on Friday, February 2nd, 1968. As usual, it came in second in the ratings, a distant second behind Gomer Pyle. And it was narrowly beat out the ABC show. Now, at this point, they were airing a new show called Operation Entertainment, which I guess was a show that kind of was following a USO troop around performing at different military bases or something like that. And it was second in the first half hour and second in the second half hour as well. Mark Daniels said of this episode, I like the science fiction aspects of Star Trek, but I also like the fact that in the first two seasons, there was some dramatic appeal and social feeling about them, and they weren't gimmicky in terms of just being space operas. A Private Little War is a good example. Walter Koenig added, quote, once in a while we did an episode that had socio-political implications. Then I felt very proud that we were dealing with a subject of that type. But there was one episode that confounded me because it seemed to be taking the position that was contrary to the general position of the show. And that had to do with the balance of power. And I thought, that isn't the philosophical concepts that are consistent with Star Trek. They can only generate thinking leaning toward anger and fear and inevitably war. The thinking behind it, the way I read it, was almost fascistic. That was a dangerous premise to beam across the country under the guise of entertainment, so I was surprised. And he was talking about this episode, and it is worth noting because, and I don't know, hindsight, maybe looking back, we kind of color it a bit and maybe exaggerate it, but generally in these episodes, the Federation is pretty averse to war. But this is one of those episodes, and there are a few of them where Kirk is he's pretty gung-ho, and he's not really, I wouldn't say he's eager for war, but he's not really shying away from the prospect either. Errand of Mercy, I believe that's the Organian episode, with the Organians. That's a good example, and that Kirk's very keen, at one point, very keen to go to war with the Klingons. And he's not, I wouldn't say he's eager, but he's not really balking at the idea either. Dorothy Fontana said it was a whole question of war balance, because on this planet there was a restricted war with low caliber weapons, if you will, escalated by the Klingons. So right away you increase the state of the art on your side, and then they go up a notch, and then you go up a notch. But after a while you have to take responsibility for this. And that's what A Private Little War was all about. I thought the message was very good. The show wasn't great, but it was quite good. Okay. that is going to do it for A Private Little War. So I will not be doing another Trek Talk a week from now. I'm going to be with my National Guard unit this coming weekend, so there will be no Trek Talk a week from now on the following Tuesday, and also won't be streaming Sunday night either. So should be back in 2 weeks. I do hope to have a video of some kind out next week, but we'll have to see how that goes. So before I go, again, please do like the video. Again, I always forget to do that until right at the end. I need to be better about that. Please do like the video if you would, and sub to the channel. And check out some of my other videos if you would. And I guess that will do it. Everyone have a good night, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. And you take care as well, Snortopoopus. Thank you. Good night.